But I was thinking, if you want, since y'all are familiar enough with the show and the intro and outro are the most boring parts anyway, y'all could just do them or do like a version of them or even like your best vague memory of how they're supposed to go.
Oh, that would be so fun.
Maybe I'll go grab my equipment and y'all can either collaboratively or tag team do like some like, truly it can be the shittiest version of whatever you remember as long as I can like chop it and put it there.
Is this just for any episode or this one that we're about to do?
I mean, I might I may use it for every episode from now on, but no, I was thinking mostly for this one in particular. But yeah, whatever, whatever is fine. Truly.
Okay.
I'm gonna mute myself and go get my shit. I'll be right back, but I'll let y'all record.
All right. You want to take it, Elijah, or shall I?
I am not Matthew Buckley Smith, and you're listening to SLEERICKETS.
Thank you all for listening. Thank you especially to those who have taken the time to recommend the show to someone else. This is the way that the word gets out about the show, and I really appreciate it. This week's episode is something relatively specific that we prepared to talk about, but actually we're going to talk about something else, probably a lot more controversial than we planned. No, I got nothing. Go, Elijah. Say something else.
I think that was a very good summing up. I would just add that make sure that only cool people are listening to this podcast.
Oh, yeah. Don't tell
for the cool people.
Don't tell bad people. Only tell cool people. Without further ado, here is the show. That's not what he says. Oh, God damn it. Yeah, that's right. God damn it.
You're in a house with Laura, is that right? Or you're moving in together,
yeah.
or you're okay?
No, we live together.
Right. And you're getting this like a pre-honeymoon trip to London?
I mean, we just like to travel.
Okay.
We're not really sure when the wedding's going to happen. The engagement.
I sound like her mother probably talking to you now.
No.
When is this wedding?
It makes sense. No, the reason why is because I had told her.
Is that why you're getting married? No, sorry, which would be fine anyway. What?
No.
Hey guys, you've only just met him, for Christ's sake.
No, because I had told her years ago that were I to propose to her, I would want to propose in Europe. And so then we started planning this Europe trip together. And this was not this trip. This was a previous trip. We started planning this trip.
You can't say I would want to be in Europe if I proposed and then plan a trip to Europe and not propose.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. That's what happened. But it was fine because I wouldn't have made the comment in the first place if I wasn't okay with the idea of proposing.
Okay, good. Good. All right. Good.
And
but not get married. You don't have to get married in Europe. You can get married in the States, right?
Yeah. It ended up. It ended up being great. I proposed to her in the Belgian city of Ghent, which it was really nice. You know, she's very into medieval stuff, and it's got a really nice preserved medieval quarter. She loves Belgian art, which is one reason why we went there, like Northern Renaissance Flemish art. And I proposed where I did, which is at this particular bridge in Ghent, because during quarantine a couple of years before, she loves to do jigsaw puzzles. And so she had bought all these jigsaw puzzles, and one of them was of Ghent, and neither of us knew what Ghent was at the time. And then we were like, oh, this is beautiful. Like, we should go there. And then so when we did end up going there, eventually, we found the spot where that picture had been taken, like the exact vista of where the puzzle had been framed. And so that's where I proposed to her. And it was very nice. But we're not planning on, the engagement is more of a promise than anything. It doesn't mean our wedding is happening anytime soon because she just started grad school, so she has to focus on that. You know, because my dad is a rabbi, she'll have to convert to Judaism in order for us to get married.
Wow.
So it's gonna be a long process.
You dodged the circumcision thing though, thankfully. So that makes it a little easier.
But I don't know if you know, but Judaism at least traditionally passes through matrilineal descent.
Oh yeah, I know.
Yeah. So it's higher stakes for the woman to convert, right, and my mom actually converted as well.
I do as matrilineal, but yeah, I hadn't thought about that in terms of marriage. No, I was just thinking, like when I was growing up, our house was always just a just a heap of chaos, just like 2 stories stacked very tightly, and 3 kids and a dog, and an unhappy marriage. And it was just always sort of like wild, like stacks of art supplies, and nothing was in any kind of order. And my dad always sort of expressed this angst about being an architect and then inviting people over. And he's like, well, I live in this house, even though I promise I'm an architect, but it's not much of an architect's house. And I'm realizing, like, as you describe your whole engagement and your plans and all of this sort of beauty and order and symmetry and sense of provenance, I realize, like, you are living your life the way, like, theoretically, like a not a like a poet maudit, but like a classical poet. Like, you're living your life with a poetic order and framing to it that is alien to most of the lives of alien to the lives of most poets I know, and to my own. But I'm very impressed with it, because I feel like part of the reason I love formal verse is that it's a form and a shapeliness that I can never even come close to achieving in my own life. But you actually seem to be doing a decent job of it.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate formal verse for a similar reason. I think that when I started writing poetry, it was kind of it was like naive free verse. I first started moving into form basically just because I liked old poetry, and I just was reading a lot of old poetry, and so I wanted to write poetry that sounded like that, like the metaphysicals, like the romantics. And it was only probably like 3 years ago that I started considering it theoretically seriously, and choosing form as a philosophical technique, a way to express myself logically, a way to try to create order, and for my art to be a form of cosmic rebellion, in the sense that cosmos of being an ordered rebellion against the chaos of nature.
You have a comfort zeal. I have also wondered, based on your various remarks about, even like in the most recent episode about Apollo, and I know you're very well educated and also very thoughtful about all this, but I actually have not, like, and your dad is a rabbi, but with Jews, it's sort of, as we've talked about in other contexts, like, it's much easier to balance practice with worldview in a way that is not necessarily it doesn't work that way with, like, evangelicals. But it makes me wonder what you actually believe about the universe. And it also makes me wonder that about you, Alice, because I realize, like, I know you are just generally more tolerant than I am of anything, like any given set of beliefs or practices or perspective. Like, generally speaking, you're just like a nicer person who finds it easier to get along with people. But I also don't really know what you think about any of those big questions.
Elijah, for the record, I was going to ask you this too, but I was going to wait until like the end of the first hour. So
I like this. I don't know how to do small talk, so this is what I like to do. This is what I do at parties. Like, this is like, I'm so glad I met you on the podcast, because I couldn't do this. Yeah.
No, I'm glad, because I'm the same way. I sometimes get accused of being of interrogating people when I meet them.
Oh man, I have heard that verb many times in my life.
Yeah. No, so it's great. I'm happy to talk about this, and we'll get to the Hecht when we get to it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, which I do want to get to, because I'm also, like, there's so much meat in here, but I'm, like, principally interested in, like, hearing where you're coming from with it, because that'll determine so much of how I respond to it, like what you make of it. But first, tell me what you believe and whether God's real.
Yeah, I think that a philosophical God is real. I think that when people reject God, or even when people believe in God, they tend to do so very superficially. I think that really the main distinction between a religious person and an atheist comes down to whether you believe the universe is ordered or disordered. I think that's the main distinction. Yeah. And, beyond that, you get into specific theologies and specific conceptions of God, which are, bound to some kind of faith in a revelation, and all the bells and whistles that come with that. But in terms of a philosophical proposition, I think to say that there is a God or there is not a God, the question is is there a source and sustainer of being which has, what we would approximately call a reason to it, which is, not necessarily a reason that we could ever understand, but it does consist of patterns. And that, when we think about order, when we think about reason and logic and discovering order in the universe, we are interacting with and discovering layers of, or manifestations of, that inner universal logic. And we're never going to get all of it, but we can at least try to find some of it. And, I think that when it comes to thinking about the purpose of human life, and how that ties into it, even if it's true that there is so much chaos in the universe, so much that seems irrational to us, because the human mind, and how, whether you believe in Adam and Eve or whether you believe in evolution or whatever, the human mind and human nature is such that we crave order. And because we are the kind of creatures that crave order, and we know this is deep in our nature, this isn't something that any of us choose, that is an indication from the universe that the universe, I hesitate to say desire, because that's the pathetic fallacy right there, but that the universe has an aspect to it which craves order. The universe has a strand within it which desires order to be made. And that is, I think, enough to start to base a human life on. We are the kind of creature, we are the kind of entity that is meant to create order, that is meant to discover order, that is meant to combat chaos.
I'm going to pretend to have some philosophical chops for a minute that people will quickly fall away as mere pretensions, but I do wonder, I think a word like reason is easily it's easy to equivocate with that word. I gave an assignment to some students years ago. I said, why write a page answering the question, why write? And they gave me answers like, because you assigned me to, because I had a feeling, and then I felt like writing, and then I wrote. And I realized I needed to specify the difference between what caused you to write and to what end do you write. And so I do wonder, when you talk about a reason, whether you mean a prime mover cause or a telos, like a thing that we're getting toward, that there's a purpose for, or that is a purpose for.
Aristotle's four causes, classic.
Sure. Which then that's where my pretensions are exposed. But yeah, go ahead.
I think that I personally am convinced by some form of a cosmological argument, because you have either an infinite regress, which is effectively to say that there is no reason, or you posit something which is also trans-rational, something which does not have a cause, something which has a aseity, which is self-caused. But even though that is trans-rational, it is a proposition which could accord with logic and could produce reasons thenceforth. Whereas an infinite regress, you're essentially throwing up your hands and saying there is no reason. And so if you're trying to discover what is the most logical thing to believe, is the most logical thing to believe something which basically throws up its hands at logic? Or is it to posit something which, necessarily transcends our logic, but can be responsible for, can be the source of everything that we do consider logical? When you talk about the cosmological argument, we get so caught up on ideas about time, and whatever God is beyond time. And I'm anthropomorphizing God, but you don't have to conceive of it that way. You don't have to conceive of it in terms of conscious creation.
All right, Alice, maintaining a similar ratio of words to syllables, answer the same question.
I think I agree with a lot of what you're saying, Elijah, but I don't think I've ever thought about it that hard. It's just, as an Australian, I'm going to retreat to my little Australian corner over here and just say we just don't think that hard about religion.
Is God a cosmic drop bear?
Wouldn't that be nice?
Drop bears all the way down. We're balanced on that.
Yeah, God, I have nothing smart to say. Everything that you just said was so fucking brilliant. And you didn't even say once. You sounded like you had scripted it. Jesus Christ. I'm so angry.
That's wrong. We were under the impression that Versecraft is scripted. Apparently,
yeah, we thought you scripted your show. Turns out you just sit there and
these are actually cold reads. He's never seen these poems before, and then he sits down with them.
This is an outrage. No,
you guys are so sweet. No, I do script my show. One of the main reasons I was nervous to do this is, I mean, first of all, you guys are like celebrities to me, but secondly, because but secondly, because I'm not used to doing things extempore. I'm not used to having to come up with things on the spot on air. So I was a little bit worried about that. But you guys are giving me the assertions I need.
I think you might be all right at it. I think you might have a bit of a knack.
I was going to say the secret is lowering expectations, but apparently the secret is just eloquence and effortless brilliance. So fuck me. But yeah, Alice, you just like for you. I mean, I'm curious. Like your sense is sort of like you don't. It's not a thing that you worry about.
Look, I have a sense of spirituality and God that's very important to me. But
you don't want to talk about it, which is fine.
Is it all right if we don't?
Totally. No, that's totally fine.
I would talk to you about it. I just don't want to talk to the internet about it.
That's fine. Yeah. No, I would actually love to talk to you about that sometime off air. Yeah, because I also my daughter the other day asked if I believe in ghosts, and I mean she's very into ghosts right now, and so I sort of use cagey in order to not rain on her parade. But part of my response is also like I don't really worry about ghosts. Like that's not like among the things I worry about. Like is this real? Is this happen? Like ghosts are not like I don't really probably think ghosts are real, but also like I don't know. Like it just doesn't. I'm not concerned with ghosts.
Well,
yeah, that's kind of like the
God,
whole...
it depends on how you define ghost, right?
Sure.
Like, is a ghost a sort of mental detritus that is left behind, or is it, does it clank in chains? Like, so there's so many different ways to conceive of ghosts.
Or is is it congenital syphilis, like in the Ibsen play? Which is truly one of the scariest ghost stories I've ever read.
No, it's brilliant. I often get exasperated by Ibsen, but I think Ghosts is great.
Yeah. I'm totally with you there. Like he's such a he's so formally brilliant. Even like Hedda Gabler, which I don't like as a play, it's just so perfectly made that like I always find him worth reading, even when he drives me nuts.
Yeah, I mean Hedda Gabler is a detestable character.
That's the thing. I thought like, did he just have a girlfriend named Hedda that he hated? But she's also the female Hamlet.
The female Hamlet. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Even fucking it was a movie version I saw with an older Ingrid Bergman in the lead role, and like she's right, and like even having in a way like it made sense because she's such a like angelic beauty and this sort of radiant figure, and she's a little bit older when she does this, which is sort of correct for the play. But even there, I still couldn't bring myself to care about that fucking character. It was terrible.
Yeah, I think in Hedda Gabler and in other plays also, Ibsen really shows his romantic hand, and I mean romantic with a capital R. Yeah. He shows how much he cares about, pursuing wild dreams at any cost in a way that is, I really think, not worthy of him.
Yeah, that's it. It always felt like small-minded, but it's also just like it is really impressive. We should actually, Alice, I would love to talk to you at some point about either, I mean, especially Hedda Gabler, but maybe also like a Doll's House. Like, I just love it because I feel like you probably would see things that I don't see that might be useful.
Yeah, I did buy that book earlier this year thinking, I think Matthew mentioned this on the show, I should read it. And it's still sitting on my shelf, but now I will read it. And I did study The Doll's House in high school. I could go back to it. So yeah, anytime.
All right, excellent.
Do you guys have a favorite Ibsen play?
I definitely do. Alice, you?
I finally read The Doll's House in high school.
And I've definitely not read all of him, but of the several I've read, I love The Wild Duck. To me, that's one where he forgot to teach a lesson. And it's just like this sad, beautiful story.
Right. I remember you talking about it on an episode, and I thought you did a really nice analysis of it. I mean, I have problems with that one too, just because there's similar situations where I throw up my hands. I'm like, why are you like this? Like, why are these characters like this?
Why are you like this?
and you have to build a fucking like working swamp diorama inside a house on stage. Like that's fucking crazy from a tech perspective. but yeah.
Yeah, I remember I read The Wild Duck as part of my, during my reading for my MFA program, and I wrote little reviews on everything that I read. And one of the things I remember thinking about Wild Duck is that it does have elements of tragedy to it, but whereas the helplessness you feel as an audience member in a tragedy is that you feel, oh, it had to be this way. No, fate decreed this, and there's nothing that I can do to stop it. There's nothing the characters can do to stop it. Whereas with the Wild Duck, you just want to run up on stage and shake them and say, you don't have to do this. No, it doesn't have to be this way.
Yeah.
So I read it a little bit as like, it has a little bit of it's like if the mechanism of tragedy in Romeo and Juliet were inserted into an otherwise adult play.
Right, but Romeo and Juliet are idiots, right?
No, they are, but it's also like, it's a teen drama. It's a YA story. And so it doesn't have like, it's like totally wrenching when you are a kid and you watch it. Like, I mean, there was nothing more powerful than that when I was a little kid, but then it's hard. It's just not as compelling as an adult. But like in The Wild Duck, you have like this child's impulsivity gets triggered by adult motives in a way that like it's sort of like a runaway horse. Like once that happens, they lose the ability to make rational decisions about how this is going to turn out.
Yeah, and I mean, Hedwig, of course, is an angel. Like, I don't blame her.
Oh my God, I love, yeah.
It's
right.
It's the adults who are so petty that even when spoiler alert, when Hedwig dies, you of course feel bad for her, but you really just feel anger towards everybody else. There's no pity for the other characters, at least for me. For me, I really love tragedy. I think tragedy is probably the supreme art, if we had to name a supreme art. But it's really tricky because, I'm someone who, because I do prioritize reason so much, if a character is not behaving reasonably, and, of course, there's different degrees of this, but if a character is not behaving reasonably, then it's very hard for me to pity them. And if you don't have pity, then you don't have a tragedy. Right. So, to me, the best tragedies are the ones where, you have someone who is in an impossible situation and shows their moral grandeur by making a decision which is the less bad option and which is going to cause them immense suffering. And, you can't blame them. Well, first of all, because they have the fortitude to make the decision and had to choose between a rock and a hard place, and also because they were put there by fate. And that sort of that cosmic message of nobility in the shadow of helplessness is what I think tragedy is all about. Yeah,
we should do a separate episode on tragedy at some point, because there's a lot to dig into there. But my guess very quickly is that your favorite Ibsen play will be either one of the ones I haven't read or The Master Builder. That's my guess.
Have you read Brand?
Nope. There you go. But good. I will now.
You should, because it's other than Peer Gynt, it's the other main play he wrote that's in verse.
Okay.
And it was actually translated by Jeffrey Hill, so you should check it out.
Oh shit! All right, yeah, actually, let me write that down. Perfect. So you sent us this essay, "The Pathetic Fallacy" by Anthony Hecht, which I guess was a lecture that was recorded as an essay or set down as an essay, and he addresses this argument that Ruskin made, and the beginning of it almost reads like a podcast where he's like, it's like one snob doing DVD commentary on another snob, and it's just glorious because they're both brilliant and incredibly eloquent. But he sort of takes on this argument of Ruskin's and treats it with very little mercy. But do you want to give us an account of what made you want to talk about this?
I wanted to talk about it because the pathetic fallacy is something that's intrigued me for a while, because I tend to side with Ruskin. I think I do believe that, as a good champion of classical aesthetics, I believe that mimesis is at the heart of the artistic project. And mimesis is very complex. It doesn't have to be, the most literal thing you've ever seen. It can be figurative, but it does have to either symbolically, literally, figuratively, it has to align with reality. It has to say something true about reality. And so based on that value, the notion that someone should not distort reality, should not sentimentalize reality, for the sake of their own emotional frisson, is something I agree with. I think that it's because the pathetic fallacy is so widespread, it seems like a very radical and austere position to take.
Well, before you go on, I realize, just for people who aren't familiar, I want to read just his brief definition of it.
Sure.
So John Ruskin says in a longer context, much of which Hecht provides in the essay, in the lecture, this is Ruskin. He says, all violent feelings have the same effect. They produce in us a falseness in our impressions of external things, which I would generally characterize as the pathetic fallacy. In his own account, and then in Hecht's criticism of this account, and at least the way I received this term when I heard it in college, the pathetic fallacy is often, at least the way I was first introduced to it, is that it is the reflection of usually it's specifically the poet's or the speaker's emotions in nature, or like the distinction, the dumb guy's distinction I learned to draw between like the classical worldview and the romantic worldview. The classical worldview was I'm sad because it's raining, and the romantic worldview was it's raining because I'm sad. And so the pathetic fallacy, that's how it is often expressed, but that's not, his definition again is slightly simpler. He just says when the violent feelings produce in us a falseness in our impressions of external things, and that's the phenomenon of the pathetic fallacy.
Yeah. Well, it's very easy to get confused by this because what Ruskin says and then how the pathetic fallacy, the term, has evolved up until the present day, it has come to encompass pretty much everything that we would call personification, except for that aspect of personification which is, say, the personification of virtue or some other abstract concept. Like that's another form of personification that's not the pathetic fallacy. The pathetic fallacy has come to refer to any projection of human feeling or human thought or human agency onto a non-sentient object, or even on an animal that's non-human, projecting human feelings onto an animal. What makes it even more confusing is that Hecht is very discursive in the way he approaches this. He really moves from subject
to
subject.
It's such a polite way to put
it. He starts talking about the pathetic fallacy proper, but then he moves on to include under the umbrella of the pathetic fallacy at least a couple of other things.
By the end, he says, but there is the beautiful and undoubted fact that metaphor is our mode not merely of expressing ourselves, but of expressing the world, or what we are able to know of it. And metaphor is not merely the gadget of poets. It is virtually unavoidable as an instrument of thought. And it's a very moving peroration that just made me think, like, wait a minute, did Ruskin say metaphor was bad?
Right, exactly. He moves further and further outward. And it starts, the pivot point of when he starts to get off track is when he starts talking about that quote from As You Like It. And so there he's talking about the pathetic fallacy, because there are instances of the pathetic fallacy in that quote from the Duke, but also there are instances of let me find the term, what he calls anagogia, or anagogic thinking.
Remind me, because this is one of those things where you always, like, you're supposed to read Dante in 4 different ways, and that's one of them, and I can never remember what it is.
Yeah. So and Dante, and another case where historical evolution has made
the secret reason I had Elijah on is just so I could get, it's like I needed to go back to English class, and I just figured it was cheaper to invite him on. So yeah, sorry, go ahead. What's anagogia?
Right. So when Dante is writing his letter to Can Grande, he is talking about 4 different levels of biblical interpretation. And so anagogia for him is when you're reading the Bible and when you're looking at specific details of the Bible and they are symbolizing to you aspects of the afterlife, right? You're looking at you can read the Bible literally, you can read it on a moral level, you can read it on in a Old Testament prefigures New Testament level, and you can also read it on this description is telling me something about the world to come level. And so that in turn, that way of analyzing the Bible has come to be a broader term, where anagogic refers to looking at the details of nature and extracting messages or symbols about the divine order from those details.
This, before I forget, just because I realize like it's a connection I want to make at some point, I believe, if memory serves, Coleman the regular listener and frequent correspondent to the show, is a Swedenborgian. And the very little I know about Swedenborg is that his philosophy involved like reading nature as a text that corresponded to the world above or beyond. So
right, that's exactly what this is. That's anagogy all the way. And it's the same with Hawthorne too. If you read the Scarlet Letter, he throws in all of these omens, right? The characters are seeing all of, there's the lightning in the sky, which is the most obvious one, but the entire Puritan worldview is based on but it involves trying to read signs in nature of God's plan, because the Puritans believed in predestination, right? So they had no say in whether they went to heaven or hell.
Yeah.
So the only way that they could, instead of praying that they would enter heaven or hell, or I shouldn't say instead of praying, but in addition to praying, they would seek out signs. And this is where the Protestant work ethic comes from, right? Where we see our material prosperity as evidence that we are righteous, evidence that we will enter the kingdom of heaven. But they would also look at signs in nature, just as the Greeks and Romans did, to see whether God was pleased with them or not.
No, that's what that the work ethic part never made sense to me from a Calvinist perspective, because I get if everyone around you is a Calvinist and you're not, you're like, oh, I better be rich, they all think I'm going to heaven. But if you actually are a Calvinist, then work as hard as you want, man. But it's fake it till you make it, but there's no making it. There's just it's going to happen or it's not.
I think the idea is that if you do succeed, that's a sign that God favors you.
Oh, so it's like trial by combat. It's like the outcome of these efforts will illuminate the existing truth.
Right, and it's so fucked up, right? Because Jesus's entire message is anti-materialistic. But they saw material. I mean, it's the same with the prosperity gospel today.
Right, Jesus Christ, yeah.
Yeah, so where material virtue equals virtue.
Do y'all have that in Australia, like the Creflo Dollar stuff?
Maybe on the Gold Coast.
Which also what is a gold? What is that? What connotation would that have if we were informed Australian listeners?
This is just a joke for your Australian listeners. Hopefully you don't live on the Gold Coast.
Okay, all right. It's like Florida jokes, except that in America
it's
people mean Florida jokes.
Okay,
sorry. All right, okay, all right.
I'm just so fucking out of my depth. I'm just listening to you guys being like, "Wow, these people are so smart."
Well,
holy shit.
I'm definitely writing coattails here, but I want to get into some of Ruskin's actual argument, because there's what I found most worthwhile, at least in the part that we heard via Hecht, was the argument, the reasons he gives for why he thinks the pathetic fallacy is a fallacy or is a problem. But what was coming into this, Alice? What were your thoughts other than Hecht was a sometime misogynist and a sometime lovely poet, or maybe an all-the-time misogynist and a sometimes
still maybe an all-the-time misogynist. There's nothing here that has disabused me of that.
Okay, right, yeah.
I'm still thinking of him as the grandfather from White Lotus season 2. Thoughts coming into it? Yeah, I had the same super basic idea of what the pathetic fallacy was, and then as I started reading this, I thought, why is Hecht writing about John Ruskin? And then I started reading the Ruskin stuff and I was like, why is John Ruskin so hung up on this? And then I'm just really glad, Elijah, that you said that he goes off track, because wow, the second half of this is just in such a different direction than the first half.
And there's the really depressing environmentalist appeal, which is like you realize as he's making it, it's doomed. But sorry. I liked reading this. I kept wanting to imagine that he had been booked to give a lecture, totally forgot about it, had a book had Ruskin on him, and then just opened it up and just gave this extemporaneous. He's like, I can fill time by reading several pages of Ruskin.
Well, exactly. It's why this is 1984? What was happening in poetry at that time that Hecht was like, you know what I need to do is spend 45 minutes just revisiting Ruskin's argument about the pathetic fallacy and then poking holes in it. And then the bit that really interests me is where he starts talking about the possibility of pure art for the quality and not for the hoi polloi. But
and the insane Ortega y Gasset definition, which you might not think is insane. I don't know, Elijah.
No, I think it's off the rails. I think it's bonkers.
Well, so would you give us a treatment of Ruskin has he doesn't just, he says, the thing about violent feelings distorting our impressions of external things, but then he gives a kind of an account of like the elements that make up a poet's outlook and output. And it's a little bit Nietzschean. Like it's a little bit, I kept hearing the Apollinaire and the Dionysiac in some of that.
You mean like the reflective versus the creative poet?
Well, yeah. So yeah, he makes that's true. So there's the reflective versus the creative poet, but then there's also like he almost like offers a Freudian foundation for where these things come from, which is like you have strength of feeling and like hardness of intellect, or like hardened like will to control yourself or something, where you have to have a powerful feeling or there's no poetry. His example of that being Pope, which is again like such a boring argument to say that Pope lacks feeling, but like you have to have powerful feeling to overcome, but you also have to overcome it. Is sort of what he says about being a poet. And there are poets who fail for various reasons along both of those spectrums or spectra.
Right.
Or say it the right way.
No, I think that he, to take Pope as an example, and of course he's incredibly unfair to Pope. I think the Pope quotation is a bit insipid, but I think that Pope in general is not insipid.
Yeah, I don't think it's as lovely as Hecht thinks it is, but especially the ending, it doesn't end well. There's a nice moment, it doesn't end well. But
so I think that for Ruskin, if you're going to write resonant poetry on the level of Homer or Shakespeare, there needs to be this sort of masculine quality of feeling behind it.
Whose assignment of gender is that, just for the record?
I'm assuming it because of all the talk about strength.
Oh, okay, all right.
So yeah, I think that he thinks a poet can write verse without strong feeling, but it's just not going to be good. That you can write these sort of limping verses, these lilting, insipid little doilies, right? Yeah. But you're not going to write the true steel. You're not going to write real poetry unless you have a strong motivation, a strong emotion behind it. But, then you have to filter that strong emotion through this Apollonian matrix of form and orderliness and precision in describing nature, and almost stoically, don't let your emotions rule you when you're discussing the topic that you're here to discuss. But at the same, but the emotion also has to come through.
And he gives some examples, and you hear these same arguments later from like Alan Tate and Ivor Winters in that essay we're going to discuss on another occasion. The Romantics exemplify some of this abundant feeling in the absence of sufficient strength or discipline.
Right. And then that's the interesting thing about Ruskin, is that Ruskin is sort of similar to, or on a more intentional scale and on a larger scale than I was talking about with Keats. But like Keats, he's immersed in this romantic age and this romantic mentality, and he can't help but be affected by it or infected by it. And he's fighting against it, but not entirely successfully. He wants to, I think, because really this whole conception of the pathetic fallacy is a volley fired at the Romantics.
Right.
I think that's a way that he's viewing it, is to say, oh, there's some exquisite romantic poetry, but it's fundamentally marred by this thing that they do.
But how do you see him succumbing to romanticism himself?
I think in a similar way that I see Matthew Arnold. And actually, when I was talking to Alice, I confused Matthew Arnold and John Ruskin because I think they're very similar on this point.
I was upset by that. Oh my God.
It's just inexcusable.
Yeah, it was very embarrassing. But Matthew Arnold and John Ruskin are both Victorian figures who, in their sort of moralistic Victorian way, want to refute some romantic silliness, but they're so infused and so amidst the zeitgeist of romanticism still that they can't help but have all these romantic assumptions which they're bringing to the table in the process of trying to refute romanticism. And for what Hecht astutely points out here is that Ruskin is assuming that you need this sort of transcendent feeling in order to write a poem. And then he qualifies that in an anti-romantic way by saying, oh, well, you can't get too carried away. Although then he says later, oh, well, but if the subject is sublime enough, to hell with it.
Yeah, you can talk about God all you want. You can just go fucking nuts if you like at that point.
Right,
but you have to have like given a good college try at restraining yourself.
Right, and I mean that's like Ibsen. That's a total showing of the hand of just a romantic soul, you know, despite thinking or wanting to be otherwise.
And it does seem like they're like, as is, I mean, and we're getting this collapsed by Hecht, but it does seem like there's sort of several different interesting propositions that don't all seem to line up the way that at least Hecht tells us Ruskin suggests. One being that there are these two orders of poet, and he distinguishes them from rates. He says like the second-rate poetry is not even worth talking about, but there are two orders of poets among the first rate, one being the creative and one being the reflective, which is fascinating. Which is Amit said something similar about some create and some refine or something like that, which is, you know, a different thing, but a similar kind of essential distinction between types of poets. And like I don't know how true that is, but it rings sort of true. And I would love, and like that's an idea I would love to see played out. I don't see that as necessarily lining up with the category of like with the distinctions he makes based on, you know, level of feeling and level of strength. Like that doesn't seem to me quite totally to line up with this other distinction of creative versus reflective. And then again, there's the pathetic fallacy, which is in itself is an interesting just idea as a thing that can happen in poetry, but it's at least as it seems to be discussed initially as a projection of the speaker's like internal experience onto the world outside. That also seems like not exactly the same thing as the reflective versus the creative, or the tension between feeling and rigor. Like they're sort of all slightly different ideas, and I in a way, like I kind of want to give each of them credit on its own, but I'm not sure to what extent Ruskin collapses them, but Hecht seems to collapse them and then dismiss them by finding exceptions. Like he finds a bunch of exceptions where like, well, this is an exception in which the pathetic fallacy is happening, but it's not achieving the effect he says it would. Like, you know, but then here's another example where it's happening, but it's being done by one of the poets he says doesn't do it. And I think those are like great scientific disproofs, but they don't really take on the ideas themselves.
Right. I think Hecht doesn't necessarily know how to refute an argument, at least based on this essay.
He's drunk, Elijah. What do you expect?
Because what he has is essentially a succession of gotcha moments, which get more and more and more off track as he goes along.
I'm so glad you guys are saying, I'm reading this thing being like, what the fuck?
But he also, like, I should say, he's so entertaining. Like, he's just so, like, this lecture would have been so fun to,
oh my God,
to hear. I mean, like, which is, again, like, it's the thing I always want from good criticism, is like, not necessarily to believe it or be convinced but like, or to even find it like all that self-consistent, but just like to have it be, it's like a good meal. Like, this may not be good for you. This may turn out badly for you, but like, boy, this was fun.
Oh yeah, it's very convivial.
Matthew's losing it.
This is amazing. Please, this is.
No, getting back to what you were saying about these distinctions between different things that are going on, I think that's very much true. And Hecht goes out into the stratosphere with that. You know, far beyond anything that you were directly addressing in the last minute or so. But I did want to make a connection between the pathetic fallacy and this idea of emotional incontinence, because I think those are connected. Because the whole point is that the poet is so incensed by their own emotions that they can't help but project themselves onto their environment. And then he does make a distinction between poets who use the pathetic fallacy consciously and those who use it unconsciously. And the poets who use it consciously are people like Pope and presumably the metaphysical poets, 17th and 18th century poets who are using conceits or conventions, whether it be the pastoral convention or something else, versus 19th century reflective romantic poets who are just letting themselves be carried away by their emotions, and their view of reality is getting distorted as a result.
Should we cite a couple of actual? Sorry, Alice, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I love that bit where Hex quotes Ruskin saying, "This is not, nor could it for a moment be mistaken for the language of passion. It is simple falsehood, uttered by hypocrisy." And then Hex says, "And one cannot help feeling that there speaks the voice of the complete prig." I think that's fantastic.
Yes. I was trying to find some examples. Oh yeah. So in the example he says this about is the Pope. Where'er you walk, cool gales shall fan the glade. Trees where you sit shall crowd into a shade. Your praise the birds shall chant in every grove, and winds shall waft it to the powers above. With the elements of nature enacting human motives there. The question I guess I have, Elijah, is like, I definitely see how an excess of feeling that's uncontrolled can lead one to project one's feelings onto nature in a way that distorts perception. Definitely see how that can happen. I also see how a careful, conscious plan, a poetic conceit can lead one to project one's feelings onto nature in a way that does not distort perception, or that enriches perception rather. I also see how an unconscious but a fortunate impulse can lead one to project one's feelings onto nature, and that can result in a true ringing poem. I guess, like, if the same result can, or the same formal result, setting aside quality, if the same formal result can be the product of several different unrelated causes, then like, how much of a meaningful connection is there between that result of human feelings projected onto nature and this problem of emotion and intellectual rigor?
Well, it comes down to what you permit yourself, doesn't it? When you're writing a poem, are you going to allow your descriptions to be distorted by, whatever you want, by the fact that you want the trees to echo your own grief? Are you going to write down the sentence that describes that, or are you going to describe something with clearer eyes? I think the pathetic fallacy is, and the moratorium against the pathetic fallacy is really, if it can be useful, it's as a guide for the writing of new poetry, of saying, when you're writing, be conscientious that you are doing justice to the nature you describe, and that you're not selfishly collapsing your own emotions with nature, and thereby prostituting nature to your heart, right?
Right.
You want to do justice to nature.
Totally. But I guess, like, but then also there are cases in which, and I thought, like, he quotes this Henry VIII poem. I think it was Henry VIII who wrote it, which I just like marveled that. By Henry King. That's why I was. This is why I'm reading too fucking quickly. I read Henry the King. I read King Henry. Yeah. So Henry King. That's far. Okay. I feel much better. It wasn't turkey leg eating, wife murdering fatso who wrote it. It was a poet who has.
I had no idea what you're talking about. I didn't know if you found like part 2 of the essay or what.
Right. No, but it's an image that Wilbur. I had a guy write me years ago say, like, aha, you thought this image in this poem you wrote was so original, but I found Richard Wilbur used the same image many years ago. And he sent me the poem. I was like, that's a great poem. I didn't think it was that original, but I mean, it was a nicer note than that. It was not, I'm exaggerating. It was not that confrontational, but it was sort of like a weird out of the blue, like, aha, I found where this came from. Like, all right, fine. But it's actually the same kind of logic in this poem, this Henry King poem by Henry VIII, where he basically says, like, the flowers accept their fate. They live in knowledge of their death, and they don't resist it. But I want it always. I want, you do obey your months and times, but I would have it ever spring. My fate would know no winter, never die, nor think of such a thing. Oh, that I could my bed of earth but view and smile and look as cheerfully as you. And they're clearly human qualities and feelings and motives are being projected onto nature, but they're doing it. He's doing it in such a way that it directly contrasts his own experience. Like, it would be hard not to call that in some sense the pathetic fallacy, but it has the exact opposite effect of that initial formulation. So I think, like, again, it's not that I don't see the connection between that overflow of emotion and this tendency to project oneself onto nature. It's just that lots of different things can result in that projection. And I don't think it's always conscious and planned. I think some of the best elements of poems come out unconsciously, but also that same overflow, that same mismatch between feeling and strength can result in a lot of other things. Like, it's not just the pathetic fallacy where it manifests. It just seems like that's one of many possible results that could have one of many possible causes. So I think it's an interesting formal phenomenon to observe, but I don't see like any essential link between that and that problem of feeling and strength.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up the Henry King, because I think this is a place where Hecht is starting to get off track, because I understand why he chose it.
Yeah,
but
please.
I think there's actually quite little of the pathetic fallacy in this poem. He does say brave flowers. That is an instance of the pathetic fallacy. And then he says,
you do obey your months. I mean, do you view your earth your bed of earth as cheerfully as you know? They're viewing and they're thinking and they're accepting. I mean, I think they're pretty human.
Let me see.
Teach me to see death and not to fear. I mean, he's talking to a projected human. You know, they're totally personified. Right. That's where you're right. That there's this weird, sloppy blurring of like this specific phenomenon into this, larger personification of self onto nature.
Well, look, see that there are certain words which I think you could use to figuratively describe a flower accurately that are not instances of the pathetic fallacy. Like, I think obey is one. I think to be acted upon by an agent and correspond a certain way is not a purely human thing to do. I think that a robot can obey a human.
It does seem like, I mean, he's asking them to teach him. They're like, that sounds to me a little bit like the argument about how Achilles is not really like the river is not personified. I mean, I don't think it undermines the observation of the phenomenon of this tendency we have to project ourselves, and I don't think it undermines the argument about that like tension between strength and feeling is an interesting problem, but I don't really see them as being essentially linked. And Hecht is totally drunk. Like, I don't disagree with you there.
So, but like when he says "teach me," right?
Yeah,
that's not ascribing the teachability to the flowers, as a fact. It's him supplicating the flowers to be taught, right?
Right. So like, show me, like, right, I wish I could learn from you, kind of thing.
Right. So it's an order, and he is apostrophizing to the flowers, but that doesn't mean that the flowers are going to be able to respond to him, and it doesn't mean that they're going to be able to teach him in any way other than him teaching himself through looking at the flowers, which he's calling, the flowers teaching me.
It's just so hard not to hear like all of those body soul dialogue poems in here. Like even, and it's not a body soul dialogue, but Death Beyond Proud was 10, Holy Song 14, the Batter My Heart, where it's not just that he recognizes that he is not sufficiently obedient to God. It's also that he knows what he should do, and he is begging to be made to do that better. Take me to you, imprison me, for I, except you enthrall me, never shall be free, nor ever chase except you ravage me. And there he's talking to God, but I think like that's like that tendency to say like, I know what I should do. I also know that I am not doing that. And both of those things are alive in me and they're at war with one another. That is an inner conflict that maps meaningfully, not tritely, but like meaningfully onto a dialogue with God. But it also seems like if you're talking to nature and saying, teach me to be the person I know I should be, though I'm not, it's hard not to see that as part of that same kind of dialogue. Like I don't see him distorting nature at all here, but I do see him using nature as an instructive model in a way that requires like a human perspective. Go ahead.
I basically agree with you, and that's why I'm saying that I don't think that this is a very good example of the pathetic fallacy, because he is apostrophizing to the flowers. He's not he's not saying, "Oh, the flowers are weeping over me" or whatever. No, he does, like I said, call them brave. He says that they know something. But other than that, the real thrust of the poem doesn't hinge upon the pathetic fallacy at all. It's really him. It's him reflecting on the flowers.
So maybe is the false connection then, or the troublesome connection, the one between Ruskin's initial claim, which is that violent feelings falsify our perception of the world, versus like there's a leap from that to we personify the natural world, and one of the ways we can personify it is in a false perception that is occasioned by violent feeling, but there are lots of other ways to personify it. And the fallacy is really just the distortion. Like if there's no distortion, there's no fallacy. Is that maybe a truer treatment of this problem?
Well, I personally would say that if you're not distorting nature, then you're not committing a fallacy. Here, yeah, because what King is doing here is he's basically talking to himself, but he's using the flowers as an occasion upon which to talk to himself. Whereas if you were to, I don't know, talk to the flowers and expect them to answer you, or if you were to read in the motion of the flowers, some fantasy that they were empathizing with you or something like that, that would be more along the lines of the ethos of the pathetic fallacy.
I'm picking up what you're putting down, Elijah. I'm with you.
All right, I could be totally wrong. I often am. So setting aside the land sharp features seem to be the century's corpse outlent, his crypt, the cloudy canopy, the wind, his death lament. Setting that aside, I do wonder, at once a voice arose among the bleak twigs overhead in a full-hearted evensong of joy illimited. An aged thrush, frail, gaunt, and small, in blast beruffled plume, had chosen thus to fling his soul upon the growing gloom. So little cause for carolings of such ecstatic sound was written on terrestrial things afar or nigh around, that I could think there trembled through his happy good night air some blessed hope whereof he knew, and I was unaware. I wouldn't call that a distortion of nature, but it's clearly like he's not only projecting one set of feelings onto nature, he's projecting potentially two conflicting sets of feelings onto nature. And in that way, I don't think it's a distortion, but I think that's where I really just think is the violence of your feelings causing you to report things falsely, natural or otherwise? Or are we arguing about whether you should project your own internal struggles and feelings onto nature?
Well, okay, can I tell you what that made me think of?
Please.
I think that the easiest way to solve pathetic fallacy, the antidote to the pathetic fallacy, is the construct of the simile. To say that something is like this, right? To say not to say, oh, it is the leaves are crying, but it is like the leaves are crying, right? And Hardy does something similar, right? Where he says it could be that, or he says,
Could
he kind of acknowledges his construction own again.
Yeah,
what he says.
Yeah, I mean the ending is famously acknowledges that seemingness. I could think there trembled through his happy good idea. But
exactly.
I mean, he also does, though. He says he also he had chosen thus to fling his soul upon the growing gloom. I mean, I think he calls it a full-hearted song of joy illimited. I mean, he's not totally scrupulous about always using similes. There is maybe a larger acknowledgement that he is perceiving things as well as feeling things while perceiving them.
Right. So maybe in order to make it as faithful to reality as possible, some things would need to be tweaked. But
I wouldn't want them to be, and I don't think it would be more true if you threw in more likes and ases.
Yeah, I mean the thing is that in the case of a poem like that, it would seem to make a very small difference. But I do think that just like with all media, the influence that poetry has on us is cumulative.
Yeah.
Right. If we say there's universe A, where we're reading poems that have all these pathetic fallacies in them all day, but otherwise they're very good, they're very moving. And then in universe B, we have the most exacting, precise poems, which do not attempt to distort nature at all, and are still powerful and full of feeling, and are good, profound poems. Right. I think that the way that people in universe A, or at least the poetry readers in universe A, are going to think about nature versus the way that people in universe B are going to think about nature is going to be different enough that the people in universe B have the upper hand, that they have a truer vision of nature, and they have a healthier vision of nature. They're not people who are, assuming that nature is going to look out for them, or that nature is going to be there for them. They have and the love they have for nature is not based on this fantastical idea that nature can somehow commune with them in this emotional way, but is based on the real goods that nature has, the beauties that nature has, the love between a human and an animal that you can have in nature, or between animals and animals, the all the environmental benefits that nature provides, the fact that nature sustains us and nourishes us, and all of these things that nature actually does. And you don't have to project your emotions onto nature to love nature. And I think that when we do, we are doing nature a disservice. We are loving nature for something that nature is not.
What I heard of that sounded great. Do you want to do like some little quick outro thing, which you could just like plug your own shit if you want, or whatever you want to say?
Yeah, go, Elijah.
If you would like to listen to a completely different podcast where I analyze poems line by line and don't swear, then please follow me on Versecraft.
That was this week's show. I am so sorry about everything that we just said. Please direct all antagonistic queries to Alice Allen, poetrysayspod@gmail.com. She will archive your shit immediately. Thanks for listening. With any luck, I'll be speaking to you again very soon. Until then.